We're back at it. The Knight in the Rusty Armor. I'm going to read chapter 6. There's only 2 chapters left. And this is the knight getting to the final castle where he's going to slay a dragon. All right, so here we go. Chapter 6. The Castle of Will and Daring. By dawn of the next day, they came to the final castle. It was taller than the previous 2, and its walls thicker. Confident that he would soon pass through this castle as well, the knight and the animal started across the drawbridge. When they were halfway across, however, the door flew open and outwalked a huge, menacing, fire-breathing dragon, glittering with shiny green scales. The knight stopped in shock. He had seen some dragons in his time, but this one beat them all. It was enormous, and flames didn't just come out of his mouth like any run-of-the-mill dragon. They came also out of his eyes and ears. What was more, the flames were blue, which meant that this dragon had a high butane content. The knight reached for his sword, then realized that he didn't have it. In a trembling voice, he called upon Merlin for help. To his dismay, the magician didn't appear. "Why doesn't he come?" he asked Squirrel and Rebecca as he dodged a jet of blue flame from the monster. Squirrel replied, "I don't know. He's usually pretty reliable." Rebecca, sitting on the knight's shoulder, cocked her head, listened attentively. "From what I can pick up, Merlin's in Paris attending a magician's conference." "I'll bet that's what he's doing," said the knight sarcastically. He was very upset with Merlin because the wise man had promised him there wouldn't be any dragons on the path of truth. "He meant ordinary dragons," roared the monster in a voice that shook the trees and nearly knocked Rebecca off the knight's shoulder. The situation looked grave. A dragon who could read minds was the worst kind. But somehow the knight forced himself to stop trembling, and then in the strongest, loudest voice he could command, he shouted, "Get out of my way, you oversized Bunsen burner." The dragon snorted, sending fire in all directions. Pretty tough talk from a scaredy cat. The knight, not knowing what to do next, decided to stall for time. "What are you doing in the castle of Will and Daring? Could you think of a better place for me to live? I'm the dragon of fear and doubt." The knight had to admit that this was indeed a very effective dragon, because fear and doubt were precisely what he was feeling at that moment. The dragon bellowed again, "I'm here to knock off all you smart Alecs who think you can lick anybody just because you've been through the castle of knowledge." Rebecca whispered in the knight's ear, "Merlin once said that self-knowledge can kill the dragon of fear and doubt." "Do you believe that?" asked the knight. "Yes," replied Rebecca firmly. "Then you take on that jolly green flamethrower." So saying, the knight turned and retreated across the drawbridge. "Ho, ho, ho!" laughed the dragon, his last ho nearly igniting the seat of the knight's pants. "Are you quitting after you've come this far?" "Squirrel?" asked the knight as he brushed sparks from his singed rear end. "I don't know," he replied. "I've become used to little luxuries like living." Sam chimed in. "How can you live with yourself if you don't have the will and daring to test the self-knowledge you've acquired?" "Do you believe, too, that self-knowledge can kill the dragon of fear and doubt?" asked the knight. "Certainly. Self-knowledge is truth. And you know what they say, truth is mightier than the sword." "I know they say that, but has anybody proved it and lived?" No sooner had the knight uttered these words, however, than he remembered that he did not need to prove anything. He was born good, kind, and loving, and he was still all those things. A man who was all those things didn't have to feel fear and doubt. He knew the dragon was an illusion. It existed only if he believed that it existed. He looked back across the drawbridge to where the dragon was pawing the ground and setting fire to some nearby bushes, apparently to keep in practice. The knight took a deep breath. This was going to be a hard theory to prove. Then he remembered he didn't have to prove anything. It was his right to continue on the path. Thus, with the thought in mind that the dragon existed only if he believed in it, he slowly marched back across the drawbridge. The dragon, of course, came out to meet him again, snorting and spitting fire. To the dragon's surprise, the knight continued to march toward him. But soon the knight's courage began to melt, as did his beard, also from the heat of the dragon's flame, and so with a cry of fear he turned and ran. The dragon let out a mighty laugh and shot a stream of searing flame at the retreating knight, setting the seat of his pants afire. With a howl of pain, the knight flew across the drawbridge with the squirrel and Rebecca scurrying behind him. Spotting a small brook, he quickly plunged his scorched seat into the cool water, quenching his smoldering garment with a hiss. Squirrel and Rebecca stood on the bank, trying to comfort him. "You were very brave," said Squirrel. "Not too bad for the first try," added Rebecca. Startled, the knight looked up from where he sat. "What do you mean, first try?" Squirrel said matter-of-factly, "You'll do better when you go back the second time." The knight retorted angrily, "You go back a second time." "Remember, the dragon was only an illusion," said Rebecca. And the fire coming out of its mouth, was that an illusion too?" Right," said Rebecca. "The fire was an illusion too." "Then why am I sitting in this brook with a burned behind?" demanded the knight. "Because you made the fire real by believing the dragon was real." "The dragon was not real. If you believe the dragon of fear and doubt is real, you give it the power to burn your behind," said the squirrel. "They're right," Sam added. "You have to go back and face the dragon." The knight felt cornered. It was 3 against 1, or rather it was 2.5 against a half, for half of him agreed with Squirrel and Rebecca, and the other half wanted to stay in this brook. As the knight grappled with his flagging courage, he heard Sam say, "God gave man courage. Courage gives God to man." "That all sounds very nice, but I'd much rather just sit here in the brook." "Look," Sam replied, "if you face the dragon, there's a chance it will destroy you. But if you don't face it, it will surely destroy you." The knight remembered the wise words spoken to him by a dear friend in days past. Decisions are simple when there's no alternative. That was indeed his situation now. And so reluctantly he struggled to his feet again, took a deep breath, and started once more across the drawbridge. The dragon looked up in disbelief. This was certainly a very stubborn fellow. "Back again?" it snorted. "Well, this time I'm going to really burn you." But it was a different knight who was marching toward the dragon now, a knight who was chanting over and over to himself, "Fear and doubt are illusions. Fear and doubt are illusions." The dragon threw gigantic crackling flames at the knight time and time again. But try as the monster might, it could not set fire to him. The dragon was puzzled, and knowing that it had lost its power because the knight no longer believed in it. As the night continued to approach, the dragon became smaller and smaller, until finally it was no bigger than a frog. The flame extinguished. It then began to spit small seeds at the knight. But these seeds of doubt didn't work either. As the knight continued to advance determinedly, the dragon became still smaller. "I have won," shouted the knight victoriously. "The dragon could barely speak. Perhaps this time. But I'll be back again and again and again to stand in your way." And with that, it vanished in a puff of blue smoke. "Come back whenever you want," the knight called after it. "Each time you do, I'll be stronger and stronger, and you'll be weaker." Rebecca flew up and landed on the knight's shoulder. "You see, I was right. Self-knowledge can kill the dragon of fear and doubt." For the first time, the knight no longer felt inferior to Rebecca. She could say it, but he believed it. He couldn't resist asking her, "Then how come you didn't walk up to the dragon with me?" Rebecca fluffed her feathers huffily. "It's your trip." Amused, the knight turned to open the door of the castle of Will and Daring. He couldn't believe his eyes. The castle had vanished completely. There was no trace of it to be seen. Sam said, "You can close your mouth now. You don't have to learn Will and Daring, because you've just shown that you have it." The knight threw back his head, laughing in pure joy. He could see the top of the mountain. The path was even steeper than it had been so far, but it didn't matter. He knew that nothing could stop him now. Stay tuned for chapter 7.